Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Competency-Based Assessment, or CBA. My name is Ragini Kular, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm part of the communications team at Professional Engineers Ontario, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that PEO recognizes, respects, and values the dignity of all people. Thank you for joining us. We acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Before I invite our speakers to tell us all about CBA, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Please note that this session is being recorded, and you can find the recording on PEO's website as early as next week. We'll have a Q&A session today at the end of the presentation. Many of you already submitted your questions when you registered. Thank you for that. However, if any questions come to mind during the presentation, feel free to type them into the Q&A box and hit send. We'll try to address as many as possible during the session. If we can't answer them all, we'll respond after the webinar. And finally, for the purposes of this webinar, we'll refer to competency-based assessment as CBA. Thank you. Let's get started. I'm excited to introduce our fantastic speakers today. Please join me in welcoming PEO's CEO and Registrar, Jennifer Qualietta, and our Manager of Experience Assessment, Adelton Ribeiro. Thank you both for being here today and for your commitment to educating our attendees on the why and the how of the CBA. Jennifer, would you like to kick us off by explaining why we use CBA to assess experience?
Thank you, Ragini. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this important webinar on CBA. I'm delighted to see that we have almost 3,000 applicants joining us today and really taking a proactive step towards obtaining a license. This webinar is an opportunity to help you understand PEO's experience assessment process. The content will guide you through completing this requirement of your application. Completing your CBA is an integral part of your journey to becoming a licensed professional engineer in Ontario, and we want you all to have the tools you need to succeed. As Ontario's engineering regulator, PEO must ensure professional engineers in the province are equipped to practice safely and effectively. Protecting the public interest is at the core of everything we do. Our licensing process, including the CBA, is designed to uphold the highest standards that safeguard our communities. The CBA plays a critical role by ensuring applicants possess the skills, knowledge, and experience to begin professional practice. It helps us assess whether applicants are ready to meet the ethical and professional responsibilities expected of engineers. At PEO, we are committed to a rigorous licensing process that is fair, transparent, consistent, and objective for all applicants. CBA was developed with these principles in mind. Today, I'm pleased to announce the launch of PEO's revised CBA applicant and validator guides. These essential resources are part of our ongoing commitment to supporting applicants. We're also introducing a CBA video series to enrich your understanding of CBA using a different format. We revised the guides to make navigating CBA more straightforward based on feedback from many of you. We've used proven plain language principles to make them clear and user-friendly. Our applicant guide is a critical tool for those working to meet the experience requirement. It provides a roadmap to guide you through each and every step. I encourage you to view your CBA not just as a requirement, but as an opportunity to showcase your engineering skills, your experience, and your readiness for a license. We want applicants to be supported in their licensing journey. Thank you again for attending, and I hope you find today's session informative and helpful as you continue towards licensure.
Thank you, Jennifer. What a wonderful address. Thank you for mentioning the CBA video series. I'm excited to share that all our attendees will get a sneak peek of the first 2 videos in this series. The video complements the information on our website, including our revised CBA guides. We encourage you to share these resources with your networks. Now, I'm pleased to invite our main speaker, Adelton Ribeiro, to walk us through the Competency-Based Assessment, or CBA process. Welcome, Adelton. Please share what our attendees need to know in order to complete their experience records when applying for a license.
Thank you very much, Ragini. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for connecting. It is my pleasure to be here today talking to you about Competency-Based Assessment, or CBA. Just before we get to the content of the day, I just want to remind everybody about the purpose of the experience assessment. So as Jennifer mentioned, PO has a statutory mandate under the Professional Engineers Act to protect the public interest. And amongst other means, PEO does that by ensuring that only qualified professionals, qualified applicants are apt for licensure. So PEO has a legal obligation to assess the quality of our applicants towards licensure. So here is the overview of the points that we're going to cover today. We're going to start with some definitions. What is CBA? We're going to discuss its components, the competencies, the categories, the roles and responsibilities of the parties involved, the applicants, validators, the qualifications assessors. Then we're going to go through the rating system and explain how the rating scale works towards the competencies. We're going to move on to explore the framework, and we're going to take the steps, how the CBA works. And we're going to also cover the submission processes, whether you're in the current process via portal, if you've applied after May 15th, 2023, or you are in the pre-May 15th processes. And towards the end, we're going to have some time to answer questions you may have. So now we're going to watch our first video, firsthand to everyone attending today. This is an introduction to CBA.
Welcome to Professional Engineers Ontario. In this video, we introduce Competency-Based Assessment, or CBA. CBA is a crucial step in your journey to becoming a licensed professional engineer in the province. CBA is a structured system we use to assess the engineering experience of applicants like you. It measures the ability to perform essential engineering tasks, ensuring you have the skills and knowledge to practice engineering effectively. CBA provides a fair, transparent, and objective method for evaluating experience. By demonstrating competency in key areas all Ontario engineers must be familiar with, you will meet our standards for keeping the public safe and upholding the integrity of the engineering profession in the province. Here's how CBA works. You'll need to demonstrate 34 competencies grouped into 7 categories. The competencies represent the breadth of skills and knowledge all engineers need for effective practice. For each competency, you'll provide a work example that shows how you've applied your engineering skills in real-world situations. We evaluate your examples using a rating system to assess your degree of experience. You must meet or exceed the minimum ratings for each competency and competency category to obtain a license. Demonstrating competency across all categories shows us you're ready to begin professional practice. To complete your application's experience requirement, follow the steps outlined in the CBA Applicant Guide and provide all the requested information. For more guidance, refer to the guide or visit our website and check out the other videos in this series. In later videos, we will explore each area of the CBA framework so you know how to present your experience effectively. Thank you for watching.
Great introduction. So now let's talk about definitions. What is CBA? So competency-based assessment is PEO's methods to assess applicants' experience towards licensure. PEO's framework is composed of 34 competencies. A competency measures one ability to perform a particular task. Therefore, each competency will represent a skill or knowledge that professional engineers need to practice engineering work safely, effectively, while independently. The competencies are grouped into 7 categories. Each categories will combine a set of skills and knowledge that will represent a fundamental area for effective engineering practice. The rating system. So the rating system includes a rating scale in which we use to rate the degree of competence of applicants in each one of the competencies. It varies from 0 to 5. 0 meaning the applicant had little to no exposure to a particular competency. And on the other extreme, 5 would mean that the applicant was able to perform high complexity tasks with minimum or non-supervision. Anything in between will vary depending on several factors. The most important ones are the complexity of the task and the level of supervision that the applicant required to perform a particular task. The rating system also includes minimum requirements. So each competency requires a minimum score. Besides meeting the minimum score per competency, the applicant also needs to meet or exceed an average score per category. That average is calculated by averaging the individual scores per competency that fall within that particular category. Great, so now we're headed to our second video. This video will dive into more details on the competencies and the categories.
Welcome to our series on navigating competency-based assessment, or CBA. In this video, we'll look at the 7 competency categories and 34 competencies. To apply for an engineering license with Professional Engineers Ontario, you must demonstrate all 34 competencies. Competency categories group related skills and knowledge that are vital for professional engineering practice. Each category includes multiple competencies, representing skills you must demonstrate through work experience. Let's look at the 7 competency categories you'll need to cover. 1. Technical competence examines your ability to apply engineering principles and technical skills to solve problems. 2. Communication gauges how well you convey technical information to various audiences, including clients and team members. 3. Project and financial management evaluates your ability to manage engineering projects, including budgeting, scheduling, and resource allocation. 4. Team effectiveness looks at how well you collaborate with others in a professional environment and contribute to team success. 5. Professional accountability measures your commitment to ethical practices, professional standards, and public safety. 6. Social, economic, environmental, and sustainability focuses on your awareness of the broader impacts of engineering work on society and the environment. 7. Personal continuing professional development encourages your commitment to learning and maintaining up-to-date skills and knowledge. You must address all competencies and categories to meet the experience requirement. Each category represents a fundamental aspect of professional engineering, and demonstrating competence across these areas shows that you can practice engineering effectively. For this reason, you must meet the minimum ratings for each competency and category to show you're ready to begin professional practice. For more guidance, refer to the CBA Applicant Guide or visit our website and check out the other videos in this series. Our next video will explore the rating system used to measure experience. Thank you for watching.
All right, so now that we've covered all the definitions of the components within the CBA framework, I'm going to walk you through the steps and explore on how the framework, the CBA framework works. So the first step is the applicants to provide a work experience summary. This summary will list the applicant's place of employment. It will include a brief description of the jobs and the work and responsibilities that the applicant performed in that particular employment, and will also include the start and end dates. These dates will determine if the applicant reaches the minimum quantitative requirement of 48 months in order for the submission to be assessed. Once that has been achieved, the next step is to address the competencies by providing a work example per competency. So I'm going to give you a couple pointers on how best to describe a work example, as well as how best to choose the most appropriate work example to address a competency. First, it is important to understand that PO is looking to evaluate your personal contributions. Therefore, use the word I when describing your work example. Also, follow the structure as what, how, and why, while elaborating on the experience. When filling in the work example, you're going to go through 3 sections. The first one, the situation, is where you're going to explain what the project or what the task is about. You're going to introduce the work that you're going to elaborate for us. Second is the actions taken. So in this section, you're going to elaborate on how you performed the tasks. What were the engineering principles, methods, and theories you used to perform the task? What were the codes and standards that you've used? What was the approach? Elaborate on your engineering judgment while approaching that particular task. And then last and third section is the outcomes. You will elaborate on the results of the task, and you will also have an opportunity to elaborate on why you took that particular approach as opposed to a different one when faced with that particular task. And when it comes to choosing the best or the most appropriate work example to address a competency, please note that we recently revised our guides, and you will see within the guide that each competency is accompanied by a list of indicators. So the list of indicators will help you, will guide you through the list for you to best choose a work example. And also an important note is that you can use the same work example to address multiple competencies. However, ensure that you are tailoring your writing according to the skill and knowledge that the competency is asking. So it is important to address different set of skills while using the same work example. So once the work examples have been described and you've addressed all 34 competencies, you will provide a self-assessment. You're going to use the rating scale that we've just discussed from 0 to 5, and you're going to provide a rating to each one of your work examples to the best of your abilities. These ratings will serve as an input to the qualifications assessors when it comes to PEO's final assessment. From an applicant perspective on how competent they believe they are in those competencies. Once the self-assessment are provided, they will then assign validators to the competencies. The validators will then rate each competency that they were assigned. And again, the validators' ratings will serve as an input to the qualifications assessors as from a direct supervisor or a senior practitioner perspective on how competent they believe the applicant is in those particular competencies. A note in terms of requirement here for the validators is that if your work example took place in Canada, the validator must be a professional engineer licensed in Canada. And if your work example took place elsewhere outside of Canada, the validator does not need to be necessarily licensed in Canada. Although we encourage that the international validator to be licensed in their jurisdiction, or at least be a senior practitioner that had a direct involvement in the work example that you're describing there. Great. So once all that information is provided to PEO, PEO will then contact the validators. Validators will rate the competencies, respond to PEO, and the file will then move to the final assessment. Applicants will be communicated throughout all these steps, and once the qualification assessors rates each one of the competency and calculates the average score per category, a decision will be made whether the applicant met or did not meet the experience requirement. Right. So when it comes to the submission process, please note that we've launched an application portal on May 15th, 2023. So therefore, we have two processes running in parallel, although as far as the CBA framework goes, they are identical. So if you applied after May 15th, 2023, you are using the application portal. You submit all the information we've discussed in that particular order via application portal. It's a self-serve portal. The steps are self-explanatory therein. And if you applied before May 15th, you're going to provide the same set of information in that exact same order, however, via fillable PDFs, via email to staff. And lastly, before we get to the questions, I want to point you out again to the guides that we recently revised. You can find them on PEO's website. So there are two guides, one for each one of the processes. All the steps that we've discussed here are fully detailed there, and as well as contact information for you to contact us if you ever need any support or anything. We're here to support you. So for applicants, for the guide, for applicants who applied after May 15th, as soon as you land on PEO's website, top right-hand corner, you see the button Apply. Navigate through the Become a PNG banner, and you'll see the experience requirements, and you're easily going to find the guide there. If you applied before May 15th, you're going to hit Apply, scroll down to the banner that says those who applied before May 15th, navigate through the experience requirement, and you find the respective guide there. I highly recommend you to go through the guide. It's an easy to read document. It details everything we've discussed here and will help you tremendously in writing your work examples. Excellent. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. I'm curious to know what the questions we've received so far. So Ragini, how about you read some out loud for us? We go through the questions.
Thank you, Dalton, for explaining the process so well. For anyone joining us now, we've just played two exciting videos explaining our CBA guides. These videos will be shared with you after the webinar. Now it's time for the Q&A session. Please feel free to type any questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible in the time we have. If we can't answer all of them today, we'll follow up after the webinar. Dalton, first question we have is, how much pre-graduation experience can count towards the 48 months?
Great question. Applicants can count up to 12 months towards the quantitative 48 months, excuse me, and ensuring that the start date of that pre-grad experience falls within the second half of the program, past the halfway mark.
Thank you. We have another question from an applicant who asks, I've sent emails to my validators, but the email provided for one of my validators is incorrect. Is there a way to fix this?
Right, process questions. Yes, there is a way. For applicants that are applying through the portal, there will be within the experience requirements tab, there is an icon, a button that they can click called decline. So that will basically stop the email to go out to the validator and gives the applicant the ability to edit the information, correct the email address, and then they can action the validators again. Now, if for applicants that applied before May 15th, all they have to do is to contact staff the same way they submitted their paperwork with the change requesting the change to the validator's information and continue with the process.
Thank you. The next question is, does postgraduate study research work need to be industry sponsored for it to count towards the CBA?
It doesn't have to be necessarily industry sponsored. In summary, applicants are welcome to submit the experience they believe that address a competency or more. If the applicant believes that the skill or knowledge required by a particular competency fits within that particular work, they are welcome to use that experience.
Thank you. One of our webinar attendees asked us this question at the time of registration. I have worked in 2 companies at the same time for 1 year. Would that count as 2 years of work experience?
Right, that's a good one. Unfortunately, no. If they are applying through the portal won't allow for overlapping dates. And even if there's overlapping dates through fillable PDF forms, the staff will flag that. So for 1 year, 2 places of employments, quantitatively speaking, that will count for only 1 year of experience.
Thank you. Next question. I don't have any Canadian experience. How can I complete my CBA?
That's not a problem at all. You can complete the CBA using international experience entirely.
Thank you. Another question from one of our attendees. I don't have a PNG validator at my Canadian company. What are my options?
Right. So validators, they don't have to necessarily be from the same place of employment. So if the applicant is performing engineering work, it's likely that they interfaced with a professional engineer at some point. So that could be a client, that could be an outsourced party. As long as the validator has sufficient knowledge of the applicant's work and it's apt to rate the level of competency or competence in a particular competency or work example, that should suffice.
Thank you. We have another question regarding validators by a potential applicant. They ask, do I need to provide a validator for each of my employments?
Right. Again, on the validators, again, not necessarily. So the requirement is to have all competencies validated. So, and the validators, they don't have to be from the same place of employment. As long as engineering work that took place in Canada are being validated by a PNG, and international does not have to be necessarily a PNG, that is sufficient.
Thank you. Can I use my pre-graduation experience towards competencies? And do they need to be validated?
Right. So yes, again, if the applicant believes that a pre-graduation experience address a skill or knowledge required by a particular competency, they're welcome to do it. Keeping in mind that the start date of that pre-grad experience must fall within the second half of the program. And what their question was about validation. Yes, they, as any other competency, they must be validated.
Thank you. We have a case-specific question from one of our attendees who says, I have a PNG validator for my Canadian work examples from a previous employer who's currently retired, but she was my direct supervisor at that time. Can she still be my validator?
Right. That's a good one. Yes. The person is able to be a validator as long as this validator was licensed in good standing at the time that the work took place. That is fine.
Thank you. I have a few now from the live Q&A chat. How long does it typically take to receive an assessment after validators submitted their CBA validation to PEO?
We are currently working in the time frame of 8 to 9 weeks, assuming that the application is complete. We've received all information from the validators, and the file is then being referred to the qualification assessors.
Thank you. There's another one. Right now, I'm working in USA in engineering projects. Does this experience qualify for CBA?
Absolutely. The experience, yeah, it would qualify for sure.
Thank you. Is there a minimum of competencies each validator needs to validate?
No minimum, as long as all 34 are validated, the applicant can use as many validators as they wish.
Thank you. What are the requirements for international validators, and how do you check their eligibility to validate our CBA?
Right. So as I mentioned previously, so we prefer that the international validators to be licensed in their jurisdiction, and if not, to be at least a senior practitioner that had direct involvement in the applicant's work. PEO can request supporting information such as a CV or any other registration documents from the jurisdiction that we are receiving the validation from, or any other documentation that the qualifications assessors see necessary. PO reserves the right to determine the eligibility of that validator.
Thanks, Adalton. Here's an interesting one. Are we allowed to use AI tools to prepare our CBA only to improve grammar and clarity?
Ideally, that's a tricky one. Ideally, no. We would prefer that the applicant wrote the work examples using their own communication writing skills, following the structure that we've discussed here, what, how, and why, making sure that you're focusing on the skill or knowledge being required, being asked for that competency, and speaking in the first person. I am sure that our applicants won't need any other source or to help them writing up their experience records.
Thank you. How many years of work done as a research assistant during PhD would count as work required, as required work experience if project is related to the industry?
Right. So if I understand correctly, Ragini, the question is how many years of a PhD degree can be counted towards the CBA?
Yeah, like how many years of work done as a research assistant during PhD?
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. No time limit. Again, as long as if the work address the competency, the applicant is welcome to use. In terms of the quantitative start and end date, as long as was an official position in a certain academic institution in this case, that meets their requirement.
Thank you. Next question. What effect does my validator's rating have on my CBA assessment?
Right. So both ratings, the validator will expand a little bit on this answer because it's a good one. So validator's rating alone will serve as an input to the qualifications assessors, the same and has the same weight as the applicant's self-assessment ratings. So when the assessors are rating the competencies, they can refer to those both ratings, the validators and the self-assessment ratings to help them to determine a particular rating if the case is borderline. So that will serve as inputs to the qualification assessors for them to make their decision. Although it is important to note here that the decision of if the applicant meets or does not meet the experience requirement is solely based on the qualifications assessor's ratings.
Thank you. Another question, is there a requirement that my most recent engineering work experience should be within a certain, only required that I have 48 months of engineering experience post-graduation, and doesn't matter how many years back it was?
Well, we'd prefer the experience to be most recent. That would strengthen the application, but there isn't a requirement that the applicant's experience must fit within a particular time frame. So in terms of requirement being met, the applicant can use experience from years back.
Thank you. Does the validator need to be a direct manager, or could it be a colleague I worked with that is familiar with my work?
Right. Ideally, yes. We would assume that a direct supervisor has direct knowledge of the applicant's competence to perform the tasks. But as discussed, as long as the validator is sufficiently familiar with the work and can confidently rate the competencies that they were assigned, that is okay.
Thank you. Do we need to mention the position and the company name in the situation while completing the CBA form?
Not necessarily. That's the discretion of the applicant. If by mentioning would help with the writing, sure. The focus is on the skill or knowledge that is being required for that particular competency.
Thank you. Will any additional documents be requested once I have submitted my CBA assessment, my CBA for assessment to PEO?
Supporting documentation, not necessary. So as we discussed on the how it works, experience summary, the CBA form, which is will cover all the 34 competencies and the work examples. That would be the only information necessary, no supporting documentation.
Thank you, Dalton. Another great question from one of our webinar attendees. What if I can't provide project details or client names in my work experience due to privacy reasons? What are my...
That is a good one. Again, I will insist in saying the focus is on the required skill or knowledge. So when writing the work example, if the applicant can't disclose the name of a client, they can refer to as the client, bookmarks. The same goes for a name of a project. The applicant can refer to the project name as the project. So it is common that applicants will omit certain information, but still be able to describe the work and their personal contributions in those particular tasks.
Thank you. For my validator's contact information, should I input the validator's current job title or the job title they had at the time we worked together?
The current is fine. The current validator's job title is okay.
Thank you. Before submitting the CBA to PEO, do I have to send the competencies to the respective validators for review, or do we just submit to PEO and then PEO will send each competency to the respective validator?
Right. Yeah. So once the applicant assign the validators and submit that information to PEO, PEO will contact the validators and then we'll obtain their response. At this point, it's important that the applicant keeps in touch with the validators, because the responsibility of the applicant to ensure the validators respond in a timely manner, although it is the applicant's time that is running, but that's all they need to do. We contact the validators, we provide them with all the information necessary. As Jennifer mentioned, we also revise the validator guide, which includes in detail the steps that they need to take to proceed with the validation, the explanation on the rating system. So all the information is provided by PEO.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all our participants and attendees. We have so many great questions. So the next question, if my bachelor's is in mechanical engineering, will my experience in the electrical, structural, civil industry count towards my 48 months of acceptable experience towards my CBA?
Right, it could be. The experience doesn't have to be necessarily from the same area of expertise of your undergrad degree. As long as that experience is engineering work and address the skills and knowledge for that particular competency, the work example should be valid.
All right, next question. I am non-CAB graduate civil engineer. I have more than 4 years of experience outside of Canada. Can you please elaborate on how to write CBA that is focused on Canadian standards and codes?
Right, so some standards, professional standard competencies that are within the 34, they will call for Canadian codes and regulations or the equivalent or the international equivalent. And that can be used and will have the same weight as an experience that took place here and used Canadian codes and standards. So I'll give you an example just to illustrate. Let's assume that applicant that is performing work in the US and they're doing track design, for example. They will use probably the code and standards called ARIMA, which is an American code that it's also used in Canada, in design work in Canada. So that is an example of an international equivalent that will have the same weight, and that experience is absolutely valid.
Thank you. Could I use only my Canadian experience for the CBA if I have 4 years of experience, even though 1 year was completed outside of Canada? I would prefer to focus on my Canadian experience for the CBA. Would this pose any issue?
No issues at all. As long as the quantitative, to start with the quantitative requirements, as long as the 48 months is reached, it is the onus of, it's the onus is on the applicant to address the competencies to the best of their abilities. And if they believe that the Canadian experience will do it best, that's totally fine. No issues at all.
That's great. Here's an interesting one. How many attempts do we get if we fail on the first attempt for CBA?
That is a tough one. PO deals with that on a case-by-case basis. Usually, I want to say usually, when an applicant fails to meet the experience requirement and is issued with a notice of proposal, if they request a registration hearing, we will give them another opportunity to write again the categories that they failed. But it's usually, right? It depends on several other factors. So if this applicant has a particular situation that the applicant wants to discuss, I strongly encourage to go to the guide. The communication channels are there for both processes, and get in touch with us, and then we can discuss more specific details separately. But overall, it's just a brief overview. It's not one size fits all.
Thank you, Dalton. I hope that helps. Is CBA mandatory to be licensed Is it, I guess the question is it mandatory to do the CBA bit to be licensed if you have more than 10 years of work experience?
Yes, all PNG applicants, all applications for professional engineer must meet the experience requirement via the CBA framework.
Thank you. If someone has 2 years of experience in Canada and more than 10 years outside of Canada, can they cover 34 competencies by just those 2 years, by talking about just those 2 years in Canada without probably taking an example of, the work that they did outside of Canada?
Mhm. That is valid. When the applicant provides the work experience summary, if they include the international experience, it is likely that in this case, the applicant will reach the minimum 4 years, 48 months. And when it comes to addressing the competencies, if they believe that only the 2 years of Canadian experience will best address, it is the applicant's discretion to best use the experience that they have.
Thank you. My work example from my current workplace didn't happen under a PNG. Can I ask a PNG from a previous workplace to validate this example?
Yes, validators don't have to be necessarily from the same place of employment. So if it is a direct supervisor from previous place of employment validating work examples that are taking place after in a place of employment after leaving that particular position, it's okay, again, as long as the validator is apt to validate that particular competency, set of skill or knowledge.
Thank you. Another interesting one, I work for a family-owned business. My supervisor is a family member. Can they validate my work examples?
That is a good one. So also on a case-by-case basis, so I'm going to touch on the PO's discretion to determine the validator's eligibility. But in this case, is when it comes to family members, it is prudent to the applicant to disclose this information beforehand. And, before submission, disclose that it's a family business, disclose the situation and seek confirmation before they put in their papers.
Thank you. Does volunteer work count in CBA?
Another trick one. It could be. It depends on the situation. If it is a case specific, again, I would refer the applicants to the guide and contact us with more details about that volunteering work, and we'll take it directly with the applicant if that's okay.
Thank you. And I think, Adelson, you touched upon it earlier, but what happens if my CBA is insufficient? May I reapply in the future?
Absolutely, yes. Upon reapplication, if the motive of the issue of the notice of proposal was because the applicant failed the experience requirement in a scenario of a reapplication, the reapplicant will then only need to write the competencies for the categories that they failed.
Thank you. Can I use the same work example to address multiple competencies, or do I need a unique example for each one?
Right. Yes, we touched on that before in our talk, and yes, they can use the same work example to address more than one competency. And keeping in mind that the applicant should tailor the writing, tailor the language to address the particular skill that is being required for that particular competency. So it's important to understand what the applicant is addressing in different competencies using the same work example.
Thank you. What changes were made in November 2024 CBA guide versus the February 2024 CBA guide? So I guess what are the changes?
The changes were basically, we made the document easier to read. It is more detailed. It explains a little bit more on the definitions of the competencies as well as the categories. It will explain in a little bit more detailed in plain language the steps that they need to take to submit their papers. So overall, it's a more easy to read and straightforward document.
Thank you. What happens if my self-rating and my validator's rating for competency are completely different?
Right. That's totally fine. We don't expect actually them to match because these are ratings coming from different perspectives. The applicant is validating their competency in a particular area, while the validators are assessing the applicant's competence in that particular area. So it is natural that they wouldn't match. And again, those both of these ratings, they will serve only as input to the qualification assessors to provide the final ratings.
Thank you. And I just want to do a time check. So we only have 8 minutes left. Just want to reassure everyone that we've received a lot of questions. So if we're not able to answer all of them today, we're going to answer them and you can find them on our website. So all your questions will be answered. Thank you. Another question that I have for you, Adalton, is what happens, or how should I interpret the rating scale? How do I know if my self ratings are accurate?
Right. First thing, refer to the guide. The guide will explain in detail about the rating scheme. The rating scale will range from 0 to 5, as we touched in our presentation here. So when you understand the complexity of the task that you're performing according to the competency and their indicators, and you understand the level of supervision that you required in order to perform that particular tasks, keeping those points in mind will help you to come to the best rating. And the guide is the answer. So the information is there, but those are the main key points to keep in mind so applicants can self-rate themselves to the best of their abilities.
Thank you. Does vacation time count within the 48 months experience requirement?
It's, we're looking for the start and end dates of a particular place of employment. If the applicant had an extended leave significant leave within that particular place of employment, it's prudent that they would disclose that, because if it's an extended leave, it means that they were not performing engineering work then. But we're looking for start and end dates.
Thank you. Here's another situational question. I do not have direct experience with Canadian engineering standards and codes, but I have direct experience with an international petroleum engineering standards, such as API. Could that count towards my experience?
Yes, that will fall in the same situation as explained in the work that took place in the US. So the API, which a petroleum-related standard that can be used perhaps in Nigeria, would be the same standard that is used in Windsor, Ontario. So if it is an international equivalent, that should suffice. Another example, on the manufacturing side of engineering, there are the ISOs or the ISOs qualifications, the quality standards. They're used worldwide, right? So manufacturers in Europe might be using the ISO 14001 for quality. Is the same one that it's being used perhaps here in Toronto.
Thank you. And last couple questions. Is there a way to see the status of submitted CBA application on the online portal for those applied after May 15, 2023?
Yes, so the status of the application will show in the portal. So once they assess the access the experience requirement tab in the portal. After submission, it will show under assessment. And once the decision is issued, it will also show in the portal. So they can keep track of the progress of the application within the application portal. And as to just to extend on the answer here, to applicants that submitted prior to May 15th, they are communicated via email by staff on the progress of their files too.
Thank you. To what extent do we need to show the application of theory? Do we need to show equations, for example?
If the equation helps with the elaboration on how, remember they structure what, how, and why. If using equations and forms would help the applicants to describe how they approach that particular task, it can be used. It's not a firm rule that they have or don't have to use it. As long, right, I'm going to insist on this key here, as long as the focus is on the skill required by the particular competency, using equations or not is the discretion of the applicant.
Thank you. If there are multiple jobs in employment history, is it necessary to give work examples from each job role, or can they be provided from a single one?
They could be provided from a single one. They don't have to cover each place of employment. They don't have to provide a work example from each place of employment. As long as the quantitative requirement is met, all place of employment, the start and end dates are in good order, they can use work examples from any of those work examples to address the competencies.
All right. And my last, so I have two more. One question, last one. So I can apply without having any Canadian experience. All of my experiences outside of Canada. So I guess if you could touch upon the international work experience.
Yes, the applicant can apply using, only international experience. That is totally fine. And can you repeat? There's a second part of that question. Can you repeat that for me, Ragini, please?
Sorry, this is just to confirm if someone does not have any Canadian experience, can they still apply?
The answer is short and sweet. Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adalton. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I want to thank you for hosting this webinar. Thank you everybody that attended today. I hope I was of some help answering the questions. Again, I would like to recommend you to access PEO's website and check on the fresh, launched videos. There will be more coming soon. Please read the guides. They will help you to navigate through the CBA. All contact information from the appropriate groups, whether you applied after or before May 15th, will be in the guide. Reinforce that we are here to support applicants throughout their licensing journey. And that's about it. Thank you very much, and have everyone a great day.
Thank you, Adalton, for sharing your insights today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. For more information on CBA and other aspects of application process, please visit our website at peo.on.ca. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone.